Imagine for a moment, if you will, if Pokémon Heart Gold and Soul Silver had an entire Pokémon Mystery Dungeon game as in-game side content. It came as free DLC on the cartridge with no need to download, allowed you to get in-game money, level grind easier to bypass grinding curves, and had local and online multiplayer. This is exactly what Yokai Watch 3 gave us when it introduced the Buster's T mode, or the Blaster's T mode. What was once a small minigame used for local play only soon became its own game outright, and now that game has made its way into Yokai Watch 3. With this edition, Yokai Watch 3 is essentially 2 full games packed together like a fat, juicy turducken thanks to the Buster's T mode. In Japan, this mode was added as a DLC update to the sushi and tempura versions, and was later part of the base game to the third version of Sukiyaki. Since the English version of Yokai Watch 3 is a localized version of Sukiyaki without the version exclusivity, the Buster's T mode is made available on the cartridge with no need to download it, saving valuable 3DS space at the time or dependency on updates to make the game good. After you follow Molar Petite into your backyard as Nate in Yokai Watch 3, you'll find your backyard acts as a gateway of interdimensional travel and be greeted by Sergeant Burley and Sergeant Slug, showing you an opportunity to find the pyramids and many other artifacts of myth and legends for you to explore across the Cluvian continent, all within your backyard. Along the way, you'll make tons of new yokai friends, such as Ancient Egypt's Ramses II, a zombie babysitter with strong resolve, Spock from Star Trek, Harrison Ford of Star Wars and Indiana Jones fame, Cleopatra as an anime catgirl who robs your house, the lost city of El Dorado as a muscular Bara dragon with fat pectorals, whom is the embodiment of the word wall breaker, a Haniwa doll comedian that treats your attacks like a joke, a legendary game developer riding on the back of the legendary Phoenix, critically acclaimed actor Ryan Reynolds, Zazzle with a dopamine-inducing priority crit, Enma waiting for his Adderall to kick in, Enma as a traumatized war veteran, Enma's powerful grandpappy, Enma showing off that he's so strong and so hot by proving that you can match the power-packed taste of Sunny D, and many more entirely new faces that were introduced in this free DLC expansion. For anyone that's played the Mystery Dungeon series, Boyfriend Dungeon, Cult of the Lamb, or Hades, they should feel right at home in this roguelike game, where you'll be playing as any yokai you've befriended as you go on your treasure hunting adventure through a selection of randomly generated dungeon floors. Every yokai you'll befriend will be assigned the usual roles of fighter, tank, healer, and ranger, much like the other Buster's games that came before it, letting you balance your team build as you please. You'll be able to switch between any of the yokai you bring with you on a dungeon run as well. Every yokai will have a basic physical attack for the A button, with the exception of certain fighters, whose A button can be a long-range projectile that uses the strength stat, or a 3-hit multi-hit attack, an X button move, a Y button move, and a Sultimate that reaches full charge over time from attacking, tanking, buffing, debuffing, healing, etc. Any yokai will gain full invincibility while doing their Sultimate animation. As a result, timing your Sultimates and comboing with your teammates is encouraged. In addition, HP stats are assigned a vague letter rank, and speed comes in only 3 tiers of slow, normal, and fast, as opposed to a concrete number for either. Elemental strengths and weaknesses for every yokai remain more or less the same. Each yokai will come with 2 equipment slots specifically for Buster's T that can only be filled using equipment you find in dungeons. One slot boosts the user's damage output with sword items, and the other lowers incoming damage with shield items. As you progress further into Buster's T, the equipment can have varying effects added to them, like damage reduction while dashing, or firing off a projectile while using a normal attack. You can also better prepare for the dungeon crawls thanks to each player being able to carry 9 items at at a time with them besides their equipment. These items can be stored in a chest in the Buster's camp and sold for money if you don't need them. These items include getaway plushies to help with survival, Signibble, Signaton, and Statiking traps that can help you against bosses by leaving them in a stun animation, perfumes that make it so you can befriend nearby yokai easier, talismans that can buff certain stats, staminums so you can keep running without your stamina meter dropping, trap tonics so any invisible traps on the floor are made visible to you, and map items that can show you the entire dungeon floor so you don't have to run around the floor to uncover the dungeon map as you normally need to. An interesting thing about the Buster's T mode is that any equipment you have on your yokai in the main game that boosts stats will carry that stat change over to Buster's T except for the speed stat, so you can make your teammates a bit stronger by giving them gear that would normally be a detriment in the main game. This also applies to any stat changes gained from the sports center. The main dungeons are the ruins, which are divided into several levels, referred to as Cluvian keyholes. The majority of these Cluvian keyholes have 5 floors, each leading to the boss on the last floor. Once the story dungeon for the ruins are done, the final Cluvian keyhole of the ruin will be available, having a jump on recommended team level, and varying in length from 35 floors to a whopping 60 floors. Every dungeon varies in difficulty, from the simple tutorial ease of the Suspicious Room to the Enma Palace having you face some of the hardest bosses in the whole series. Though you are more likely to get the pleasure of risking your entire team getting wiped by Unkeen or Mulinda because of Shockwave Stomp. You'll need all the power you can get to take on this mode because with every 5 floors, you'll be fighting a boss of some kind. Whether it be a mini-boss where you fight a gigantified version of a yokai with a beefed-up HP stat, a true boss battle against old bosses coming back from Red Cat Corps and White Dog Squad, or new ones introduced in this iteration of Busters. As you progress by clearing more and more dungeons, you raise your team level, which is a general rank estimation of your current strength, so you get a better idea of whether you should risk taking on certain dungeons. You want to be especially smart on which dungeons you take on. In the Mystery Dungeon series, there are items like Reviver Seeds and Escape Orbs to get out safely if things get hairy. That way, you can salvage what you obtained in a run even if you didn't complete it. In Buster's T, you don't have as many safety nets. While you can fill your bag up with getaway plushes of varying tiers to prevent you from being knocked out and get some use out of the invincibility frames that come after, you can then be knocked out after you run out of them. Once a yokai is knocked out, they'll be left in a state where their allies have to gather around them to revive them. Once the revival gauge is filled, thanks to the allies saving the yokai, they'll get some of their HP back and be ready to fight again. The more times a yokai is knocked out, the less revival gauge they'll have next time. If a yokai's revival gauge is empty from being unsaved, the yokai will be unable to fight or participate in the dungeon for the rest of the adventure. The only other way to get out is for the rest of the yokai to complete the rest of the dungeon, or go through a door that lets them escape the dungeon partway through, which is only an option on every 5 floors after a boss or mini-boss is defeated. If no one clears the dungeon or escapes, all the items, money, and yokai you befriended along the way are completely forfeit. This all makes the mode very challenging and forces careful consideration, strength, and skill to reliably clear a dungeon, and most notably, keeping your greed in check. All these dungeons follow a pattern in which the harder a Cluvian keyhole is, based on its recommended team level, the much better rewards and treasures you can find from treasure chests in said dungeons, in addition to there being rarer and stronger yokai to battle and befriend. The Buster's T mode uses the befriending minigame that was present present in both Yokai Watch Buster's Red Cat Corps and White Dog Squad, where, upon defeating a yokai, that yokai will remain standing and have a pink ring around its feet to indicate you can befriend it. You can then press the A button to play a QuickTime event rhythm game with little hearts, and if you win, that yokai will become your ally after you escape or clear the dungeon. There are also dungeons with a level recommendation of ? Which scales off your team level. Every floor will have a random number of treasure chests scattered about, showing you why the T in Buster's T aptly stands for treasure. You can also find treasure chests carried around by random yokai on the floor, as noted by their black icons on the map. Defeated yokai will always respawn on the floor, including ones that will randomly be carrying treasure chests. Treasure chests are full of all kinds of useful items, including books, equipment, and Crankakai coins. The most valuable treasure you can get from these chests is the Clutifact. Clutifacts are randomized rewards dependent on the Cluvian keyhole, as noted by each dungeon's Clutifact memo. After a dungeon is cleared, each of the Clutifacts you've gathered will randomly become one of the rewards on the Clutifact memo. Clutifact rewards can include Exorbs, enhanced revival medicine, and items you can sell for vast amounts of money, which the local convenience stores can somehow afford. You can also obtain items that are incredibly powerful both in main game and busters, with Adept Treasure to max out a yokai's moves, Spirited Treasures to max out soul gems, Insightful Treasures that give immense amounts of EXP so that you can reach maximum level very easily with 3 or 4 of them, and the Prestigious Treasure to raise the rank of any yokai by 1 letter rank per treasure, raising their stats. You can only do so with up to 8 total yokai. Clutifacts can also grant you rare yokai medals. Any yokai befriended this way will automatically be set to level 1. Obviously, this is in place for balancing reasons, given some of the yokai you get this way are S-rank legendaries. On these dungeon floors, you'll see gold coins lying around. If you collect 100 gold coins, a door will spawn that allows the player yokai to cooperate in a minigame, where the players try to catch as many food PNGs as they can while avoiding any bombs. At the end of the minigame, a humanized trio of the Brogers will award you a treasure chest. With 20 points, you get a bronze chest. 40 points awards you a silver chest. 50 or higher gets you a golden chest. The better your chest, the better your odds of getting a Clutifact. Upon successfully clearing a dungeon, all the yokai that played will be given EXP depending on how hard the dungeon was. The Clutifacts get revealed and added to your inventory. Any gold coins left over before the full 100 will be converted into $1 per gold coin to further help players with the money grind, and any yokai you've befriended will have their medals added to your medallion and medal collection. Following Yokai Watch's gameplay tradition of keeping battles and encounters short yet packed, you'll be on a timer that keeps you from staying on any one floor for too long that lasts for 10 minutes. This balances out yokai enemies carrying treasure chests so you can't just farm them indefinitely. This element is seen in similar roguelikes, where the player is encouraged or forced into going deeper and not stay in one spot for grinding good materials or a high score. However, you better expect that time to go down a ton, cause if you end up falling for any traps, they can do things like take a full 2 minutes off your timer, slow you down with the classic Japanese anime gag of a wash tub falling on your head, slipping on bars of soap, your UI going invisible for several seconds, getting warped to a random spot on the dungeon map, being blown up by bombs, and everyone's favorite, all your progress on the floor map getting erased. Which is why everyone will be obligated to follow you if you are lucky enough to get Hinozal awoken, or use a yokai that is immune to traps outright. Some yokai do have skills that increase the amount of time you start with. Speaking of which, there are a good number of yokai you can only get from a particular dungeon that require tags, which you can get from Mr. E near the northern mountains of the Cluvian continent. This is a main game daily event, which means it resets every day after 6 a.m. on your 3DS clock. Talking to Mr. E here will net you a random tag for one of the Deva yokai. These tags are required to be able to attempt taking on these dungeons. You can stockpile the tags over time for multiple attempts. By defeating these yokai as mini-bosses in their respective dungeons, you have a small chance to befriend one of each of them once per save file. Deva yokai can revive allies much faster, similarly to Elder Bloom, without needing the same skill. And every one of them is a powerful S-rank yokai, both in the casual story and the competitive metagame, making them all worth befriending. In addition to tags, you can also unlock special auras through dungeons. Once you get far enough in Buster's Tea from clearing dungeons and progressing in its own story, you'll unlock an NPC yokai known as Lil Yora. By using your yokai vacuum cleaner in the main games to pick up pieces of garbage items, you can then trade in those garbage items at a baffle board in the garbage dump in BBQ with Green Gramps, whom can give you various items. This helps a lot with lottery tickets, the fusion item American Flower, and ghastly fragments. You can then trade in these ghastly fragments to Lil Yora for various effects. You can befriend the first yokai you defeat in a dungeon, boost your odds of Clutifacts from chests, boost your team's stats, get more EXP from dungeons, and more. Some of these auras can unlock special aura dungeons, which have various yokai and Clutifact rewards that are usually harder to get by other means, such as the Shielding Soul. All in all, Yokai Watch 3's Buster's Tea mode only adds on to an already massive game packed with content, but it's not without its criticisms. It's easy to get addicted to the gameplay loop of Buster's Tea, so much so that you end up breaking the main game difficulty curve by either over-leveling, acquiring a full team of S-ranks before the end game, or acquiring so much money that you can buy your way out of items and obstacles that would otherwise be considered expensive. In Yokai Watch Buster's Red Cat Core and White Dog Squad, every yokai could have a total of 3 or even 4 moves that they could choose between to set to their X or Y buttons. Buster's Tea doesn't have that option, so now every yokai is stuck with only 2 moves. So many of them become much weaker or harder to use in Buster's Tea compared to the options they had in Red Cat Core and White Dog Squad. Another gripe is that the equipment doesn't have as much depth compared to Red Cat Core and White Dog Squad, as those games had their own equipment crafting system that allowed for stronger and unique builds due to the vast variety of effects the equipment could have. Now all you have here is equipment that makes you do more damage or take less damage. Bosses in general are much weaker this time around. Red Cat Core and White Dog Squad's boss roster demanded nothing more than pure skill and team coordination on the part of the players just to clear them on normal difficulty, and even more so on super and ultra difficulty, not to mention the true challenges. Buster's Tea has no difficulty options on the bosses, and they're not as strong as before. Shogun King in Buster's Tea is far easier and far less threatening than his rightfully scary previous iteration. Buster's Tea doesn't even have a big boss feature, where you could just battle bosses for fun if you wanted to, like in Red Cat Core or White Dog Squad. Now you have to go through several floors before you can fight those bosses. Personally, I feel like they could have easily implemented a feature like that to make Clutifact grinding much more fun. Unlocking new dungeons in in this mode is a bit repetitive. You have to repeatedly clear the tutorial dungeon Suspicious Room in order to be taken to other parts of the Cluvian continent. Once you do that, you have to find a special door that unlocks the area, so that you may embark on dungeons available in said area. This part is purely random when it happens, so you'll find yourself playing the Suspicious Room dungeon a good number of times. In the grand scheme of things, these criticisms are but a single gold coin compared to the vast treasure trove of the whole game, since it's not as though Buster's Tea is all a single game on its own, but a single part of an even huger game that is Yokai Watch 3. By using a completely separate system to act as the PvE, it doesn't get in the way of casual or competitive play, and gives you a method to gain more resources. I hope one day other games can take note on how to design a real-time monster collector like this, or even just a good roguelike game. Maybe not today, and maybe not ever, but at the very least, we can take a look at Yokai Watch and admire what it has to offer with its good game design.